Part 4 of Monetary Reversionism. We're in Job chapter 20, and we're on point number 4 in our outline. Now, eventually, all the money that has been gotten by monetary reversionists is going to eventually be forfeited under the law of just compensation. God is going to always balance the scales. And for the time being, it may seem that certain people have the upper hand with regard to money. But just let me say that God has a way of reversing things. And that, of course, is what Romans 8:28 is. God makes all things to work together for good to them that love Him. So putting Him first will mean that He will provide our needs. And though there are certain ways that we need to view money to be concerned about it, on the other hand, to be miserly, to be stingy, to be cheap in the way that we look at things to try to get more for ourselves is not a Christian viewpoint, as we saw and will see. In fact, we're going to see it in some couple of little critters here in just a little bit. Job chapter 20, verse number 15. He has swallowed down riches. Now, this is the guy who takes big bites, takes big chunks of riches in an attempt to eat as much as he can at the table. But note what God says He's going to do. He's just going to vomit them up again. Can't hold it down. If that's ill-gotten gain, it's not going to satisfy. It's not going to nourish. Temporarily, it might fill you up, but you are going to disgorge it in the end. You'll be empty. God shall cast them out of His belly. He'll suck the poison of asp. The viper's tongue shall slay him. And this is all an attempt to sink poison, of course, into someone else, so that they might die or that they might be sickly, weak, and so forth. We're going to see that in a little bit under the discussion of a hyena and a shark. Do you know who hyenas and sharks like most as far as their prey is concerned? Live prey. But they don't like live prey that is powerful and strong. It's either young or aged, weakly, on their last legs, or tired out so that they cannot run. And they eat their flesh alive. That's what they do. They eat their prey while they're still living with full knowledge of it. Why does a shark like to smell blood? Because that means that its victim is wounded and weak. And so he can just have no problem eating this thing. But if we apply those same principles to us, what about those who are out there in that same condition? Do we smell blood? Do we go in for the kill? Are we about to swallow them whole, alive, and so forth? So, he shall see rivers, he shall not see the rivers, the floods, the brooks of honey, and butter, and so forth. Okay? Because, where am I here? Verse 18. That which he labored for shall he restore. Now, here is the concept of God balancing the scales. Eventually, God is going to give just compensation to the person who worked for it. That's the whole idea. It can't be kept for long before God Himself sees what's going on and makes amends. And shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. You may get it, you may hurt others, you might grow that little nest egg, but eventually God is going to see to it that you do not keep it. Because He hath oppressed and forsaken the poor. Now, we always think of the poor as those that are bound for the rescue mission, and that's not true. The poor is a working class of people in the Scripture, except for those that are the poor remnant. The working class that can never get ahead because there are men in power over them that will not compensate them. They can't make ends meet, let alone to save some for a future day, a rainy day, as they say. That is an oppressor. And sometimes we become the oppressor. because we are not interested in just compensation. And we have discussed those things before. Because he has violently taken away an house which he builded not. Now we're going to get to these things, the partridge, the moth, the shepherd, and so forth, and we're going to see their significance. But the idea here is to be able to acquire the property that someone else worked for at a reduced rate or free without compensation. And without seeing to it that the man on the other end that's selling has a livelihood. That's what we're going to get. It's violently taken. Why is it violent, by the way? Because to do so means the hurt of the other person. That's why it's violent. It is, there's no bloodshed. There are no bruises on the body, but it's violent nonetheless. Because you are attempting to take from them what rightfully belongs to them, and you want to do it in such a way as you leave no scars and no evidence that you really stuck it to this person. But God considers that violent, an attitude of violence. If you have to, you'd conk him on the head to get it, because that's how you want it. But you want to stay within the legal bounds, so you just simply take it away from them through the means available. Surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. In other words, I like this. He needs a little Pepto after he eats the ill-gotten gain here. He's going to have distress in his stomach. He shall not save of that which he desires. Again, God's going to make him vomit it up. There shall be none of his meat left. Therefore shall no man look for his goods. In the fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits. Now what am I going to do? I got all of this gain. I did it illegitimately. I did it regardless of Christian values and principles. And now all of a sudden I'm either heading in for eternity or the tables are being turned on me. Now what am I going to do when God begins to compensate me for my wickedness, for my inequity, for my evil? Verse number 22, he shall be in strait. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. Now, if you're going to be a bottom feeder, what is a bottom feeder? You ever fish in the Ohio River and you get a bite and you think it's a big bite and you get a carp? They're pretty heavy fish and so forth. One of the reasons that they're heavy is they've got a lot of food. They're bottom feeders. They eat carrion flesh, sewage, and anything else that has died and has sunk to the bottom. It's not a good thing to be a bottom feeder, you say. But all of a sudden, you begin to get sickly and die, and you sink to the bottom, and guess where all the other bottom feeders are going to come? They're going to come right to you to do what? Eat your flesh now. It's your turn. That's what this is saying. Fullness of his sufficiency, he shall be in straits. What am I going to do? Because now every hand or mouth of the wicked shall come upon him. Going to be a bottom feeder? You're eventually going to have them turn on you and eat you. When he is about to fill his belly, God shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. You're not going to get away with this meal indefinitely. You're going to eat and you're going to eat and you're going to take big chunks and you're going to take big bites and you're going to try to consume it and you're going to try to stick the fork in it and put it on your plate before the other guy. If you've ever lived with a big family or in a boarding house, you know what I'm talking about. And you're going to eat it real fast to try to get it, but it's not going to set right with you. Eventually, it's going to cause you problems. That's what he's saying. Let's come on down here. Verse number 27. Heaven shall reveal his iniquity. When we begin in our hearts to lust and desire to have, to pray, but we don't get it because we pray amiss, to consume it upon our lusts. To pray. Suppose young people praying to Santa Claus for things they, quote, want for Christmas. Isn't that teaching them that covetousness and compromise is the way to get what you want in this world and to get more of what you in actuality deserve? But it's all going to be known. It's all going to be revealed. People are going to eventually see it. God is going to turn the tables. The earth shall rise up against him. The increase of his house shall depart, and his goods shall flow away in the day of God's wrath. This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the heritage appointed unto him by God. That's what he's going to get. What is his inheritance? Nothing. Nothing but what he is going to vomit up. There it is. What you see now is what you get. You got it by ill-gotten means. You got it by corruption. Now that's what you've got to eat. Nothing but corruption. See it? It's not very pleasant. But yet, that's the picture that God is drawing for us here for those who have this kind of mentality. Now, let's go then to Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah chapter 17. Now, the bottom feeder is one who eats off the other guys, what it is. Attempts to get the life's blood and the life's flesh of someone who has built an empire the right way and wants to consume it. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse number 11, we have an interesting illustration here about a partridge. Now, this one was not in the pear tree. I've never seen a partridge, but if I have, it was never in a pear tree. Evidently, they must like pear trees, as the song goes. I've never seen 8 maids a milking. 3 geese, whatever. Verse 11. As the partridge sits on eggs and hatches them not, so he that gets riches, and not by right, shall leave them in the midst of his days, and in the end he's going to be a fool. What does a partridge do? Partridge sees a little nest. The nest someone else built. A nest egg in the analogy, as it were. I like that. And there are eggs in that nest that someone else went through the trouble to lay. Birds, too, have to have this parturition, as it were, to put those eggs in there. So it's a little bit difficult. But the mom can't sit on the eggs forever. Eventually, she's got to go get water and something to eat and the like. And the partridge sees a nest that someone else has built, and eggs that someone else has laid, and the mom or the guardian is not there. So what does he do? He comes on that, or she, he comes on that nest and sits down. I'm claiming this nest and these eggs for myself. Now that works for a little bit, but eventually what is going to happen? The true mother and owner of this nest is going to return. And nothing worse than a mad mom protecting her young. And so therefore, the partridge is either going to have to leave the nest behind for the real owner, or have to sit there and be pecked to death while sitting on those eggs. She's got an option. Now, of course, she's going to leave. But the point here is that he tried to get someone else's empire for nothing. That is it. And when we make that attempt in our lives to demand that others give us our due, but then when we see an opportunity, we have a takeover, as it were. Here she is. Oh yeah, well that nest is empty. Hey, I like the way they built that. And those eggs, well, they don't look like mine, but that's okay. I'll just sit on them, sit on my nest egg, and make me feel better, and then these young can help me when I get older here. So there's the illustration of the partridge. But you will note that in the end, the partridge is made a fool. Why? Because you're not going to get away with it. The God of righteousness and justice is going to eventually give the property back to its true owner. It may not be immediate, but it's going to be eventually. God has to reward good and bad, and inequity for inequity, and that's what it's going to come to. Now, he doesn't just leave us here. Turn to the book of Job once again in chapter 27. Job chapter 27. And there are a lot of scriptures here that we can read. We'll just get to the one here. Let's see if I can find it. Verse number, we'll start with verse 13 and read down. This is the portion of a wicked man with God, the heritage of oppressors, which they shall receive of the Almighty. If his children be multiplied, it is for the sword. His offspring shall not be satisfied with bread. Those that remain of him shall be buried in death. The widow shall not weep. Though he heap up silver as the dust and prepare raiment as the clay, he may prepare it, but the just shall put it on, and the innocent shall divide the silver. God's going to compensate. So what does he do? He builds his house as a moth. Now here's the second illustration here. Where does a moth go, for those who buy moth repellent for clothing and so forth? Where do they go? They head toward clothes. Are they its clothes? And the answer to that is absolutely not. It hasn't gone to Paul's over here on the west side and got fitted out for a suit of clothes. But this is a pocket for those who don't see, and there's a little red button there and the like. And we'll just make this the moth's house. Someone else's suit of clothes. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to go in there, and what does the moth do? None other but begin eating the fibers of his house, which belong to somebody else. And he lays larvae there, which will eventually become moths that will do the very same thing. That will eventually, they will eventually eat themselves out of house and home. But the problem with that is what? It wasn't his house to begin with. He consumed what belonged to somebody else for his own livelihood. That's the moth for you. He doesn't care. He has no values. And it doesn't matter. Just as long as he can make his house and lay his eggs, it doesn't matter what it costs the other fellow in disrepair to his house, the suit of clothes, and ruin it. All right, there's one more thing the verse number 18 talks about. And that is a booth that the keeper makes. He builds his house as a booth that the keeper makes. Now, here is the situation of the shepherd in the field. When a shepherd is in the field and they have a permanent location, they go out and build what they call booths in the field. They do not have their tents with them, and it's warmer in the summer. They just simply put up some poles and put some tree limbs and leaves over them. Now, it's kind of flimsy, but they only need it for the night because the next day they're going to move on. So they don't put much into it. It doesn't last very long because they don't work it to establish it to stay. Okay? This is how rich people are. In this case, ill-gotten gain. They don't want to put much. They don't want to put out much. That's how they build their houses. They want to be cheap. They want to be chintzy, something that is not going to last. They've got something, but that's all it is the frame of something, because they don't want to put the time, effort, and especially the money to build something that is going to be stable, something that is going to last past the one-night stand, as it were, in the field. So all of these things are not compliments if you are like any one of these. Are you like the partridge? Well, what do? They try to steal someone else's nest egg and make it their own so that the other is left out in the cold with no inheritance. The eggs are indicative of the inheritance. The stable house is indicative of the nest. Are you like the moth? You're interested in making someone else's clothing your house, someone else's house yours, so that you consume it upon your lust. Ruin it not only for them, but also for yourself. That's what the moth does. Now, the shepherd is not at fault at this in just simply making a booth temporarily. But the point is this. There are those who say, I'm going to get by as cheaply as I can, as shoddy as I can, so that I don't have to put out the money. And just like that shepherd builds this little temporary shelter, there are other people who do that so that they don't have to pay the painters. They don't have to pay the carpenter workers. They don't have to pay those who work in this type of industry so that they cannot make a living, but they don't care. Because of their value system. Money in the bank is more important than having somebody with the wherewithal and the know-how to put up a structure that is going to last. These are not compliments. It's not a pretty picture. So, just as wealth increases, therefore, it is going to decrease if it is ill-gotten gain. Now, let's go from here to the book of Proverbs. Go from here to the book of Proverbs, and let's go to point number 5. Proverbs chapter 10. And we'll start with verse number 2. Treasures. Proverbs 10:2. Outsar in the Hebrew, and it's in the plural, and it means treasures in a house or many houses filled with treasures. Treasures of wickedness. But now this isn't simply a common word for wickedness. It's a specific kind here. Resha has to do with crimes against civil law, especially in the area of money. All right? Treasures of wickedness. Now, what it's talking about, again, is getting your treasure houses filled without doing right by way of compensation. So you've got money in the bank, but the question you have to ask yourself, I've got all of this treasure in the bank. How did I get it? Just like those 3 things that we just mentioned. Was it ill-gotten gain? Did I get it off the back of another man? Did he work real hard, now all of a sudden I've got it and too bad for him? Did he work real hard and deserve to be paid so that he can have a life and a family? Or did I attempt simply to cheat him out of it? You got to ask yourself, how did my money get there? As we go out to the malls here, and there are all these sales and the like, ask yourself, am I going to get more for less? Something for nothing? Am I going to buy into the lie that I'm being told about all these things? Actually, sometimes, long time ago, with regard to Christmas and the purchase of goods, don't we really want to get these things at a reduced rate, a cut rate, because we want to tell a lie? Pastor, what do you say? I would never lie. Oh, yeah. Because you want to give the appearance that you're giving a gift that under normal circumstances would cost so much money to somebody, to make them think, oh, you just really outdid yourself this year, but you got it for less money. Isn't that a little white lie? Isn't that actually saying, well, now, wait 1 second. Yeah, I want to give it to him. I want to get it, but I'm not going to give it to him unless I can give it to him for this price. And it's got to be greatly reduced. But I'm going to give it to him under the pretense that I paid full price for it. Isn't that a lie? I mean, I ask myself. I have to ask myself those questions. Because we come to this point and everything gets confused. It's all rushed and all in the hubbub of doing things, and all of a sudden, everything we stand for and value goes right out the window, and I scratch my head and I think, now I've come through another Christmas season, a holiday season, and we've done all of this, and I feel emptier than I did even last year. Empty. Why? Because this is what it's about, what we're talking about. The absolute feeding frenzy of sharks on one another, or bottom feeders. We're hoping that we can get this reduced rate. We're hoping that somebody goes out of business and sinks to the bottom so that we can go right down there and consume their flesh. And sometimes I think to myself, dearest God, I'm better than this. I'm better than this. I don't want to lie. I don't want to live under false pretenses. I'm better than this. And yet that's exactly what we do. We want others to think that we have spent so much on them, and we did not do it, but we wrap it pretty and we give it to them under that pretense. And I ask you, in your own heart of hearts, against your conscience, is that not a lie? Aren't you trying to pull the wool over the eyes of someone else? And I say to you, that's exactly what it's doing in this feeding frenzy of the season called Christmas. It would be far greater, at least in my estimation, to give what's right, to pay what's right, to do what's right, even if it means that you cannot do as much under the pretense of doing what you can with just compensation. Okay. Where are we? Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. And you say, okay, Pastor, if I'm righteous, that means I'm not going to die. Oh, no. This is not muth in the Hebrew. This is a different Hebrew word, and it is worthy of our investigation. Death means meveth, meaning the realm of death, or death personified. If you're righteous, it's saying, you do not personify death. It keeps you from being the personification of death. Now, in our minds, if I were to say, what is the personification of death? Well, the Grim Reaper. You got this tall cadaver standing up there with this shroud over him, with a sickle, a scythe up there, and his bony fingers, and he's coming to the door to knock on you, and knock on the door, and to tap you on the shoulder, and to take you out, as it were. That's the picture that we have of death. And you know what the Scripture is saying right here? That's really not the picture of death that you should have. In one sense it is, but in the other sense, if you want to get your treasures by unjust compensation, you begin to personify death. Death or us is what it is. You know? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's somebody on the one side that has life. And in order to sustain that life, he must have a living. We all understand that. If we understand anything, if anybody does, we understand that. Every time the wolf comes to the door, every time we've got to write a check, every time we've got to use plastic, though it seems to be easier for somebody to do that than others, every time we have to delve into our money source and pay out, we understand. But every time payday comes around, we understand about living, needing it, and how life is. Well, what are we doing? Keeping the wolf from the door is just an analogy to keeping death from the door. You see, if the wolf comes and takes away our living, eventually we're going to die. That's what's going to happen. If we have no means to sustain our life, we are going to die. The wolf at the door is symbolic of death. Only in this verse of Scripture, it's not the wolf that is at the door. You know who it is? The person who wants to fill his treasure houses with the ill-gotten gain. That's who it is. It's us if we're like that. We become death. Because we come to the person with a life and who needs a living, and we say, we want your substance for ourselves, and we want to take it away from you and consume it for us, but we don't want to give you what it takes for you to live. Do you know what that is? That's death. That's what death does. It takes away our livelihood and our life. So when you view it this way, every time you come to buy and sell, think of yourself, am I life or am I death? Am I going to cut this other guy a break to allow him to make a living? Or am I going to try to stick it to him to take his substance for myself and leave him out in the cold with nothing? As soon as you do, you're the epitome of death. You're that cadaver with the shroud and the scythe standing at the door, tapping him on the shoulder and saying, hey, I want to consume you. I'm telling you, it's more serious. We like those type sermons where we pick on certain other things. And it gets awfully quiet in here with regard to this thing, because I know that it's near and dear, in this area especially, it's near and dear to the hearts of people. But I'm just trying to protect you, because eventually, if you are deaf and you are attempting to live off the bottom and live off the work of others without just compensation, death is going to come to your door. You're going to get in a situation where things are going to begin to come apart for you, and nothing is going to prevent it. Okay, let's read on. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casts away the substance of the wicked. All right, let's move from here to Proverbs chapter 21. Proverbs chapter 21. Stay with me. Two more portions in Proverbs, and we're done for this morning. Proverbs 21:6. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity tossed to and fro of them that seek death. Again, it's meveth. Seek to be the personification of death. Seek to act like death. To work or operate in the realm of death. The robbery of the wicked shall destroy them, because they refuse to do judgment. Judgment is doing your best to see to it that the other person is compensated in a manner which you could live with. You're not trying to put it to him. You're not trying to get something for nothing. You're trying to see to it that this guy, if he does the work, gets just what you would if you did the work. And again, I understand there are factors that must be considered in the overall view of things. But for some reason, we can't get it through our heads that when we demand to be paid a certain amount, there are other people who have the same right to have that demand. And for us to deny them that right means that we are becoming like death. We're seeking to be like death and operate in its realm. Death takes the life and living, the livelihood, away from other people so it can consume it. Now, let's go to Proverbs chapter 1. Here's the victim. We'll put a little blood gushing out here for you. We're going to just talk about, again, just briefly, the hyena and the shark. What are you, partridge? Moth? Do you build just simply temporary shelters because you're too chintzy to pay for something more sturdy and better? You're going to be like the hyena and the shark. Verse 10. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Sinners. Well, what do these sinners do? They say, come with us, let us wait for blood. Let us lurk privately for the innocent without cause. Now see, that's what the hyena and shark do for the most part. Weak, sickly, wounded, young, aged, or somebody they can run down in the pack, tire them out so that they're breathing, but they're flat on their back because they just can't move another muscle to escape the pack and so forth. Smell blood because there's a wounded victim splashing about on the surface, and they realize that it's wounded and weak and go in for the kill. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave. Here's the hyena going after the victim. Death gets you by taking your life bite by bite, bit by bit, piece by piece, just like these hyenas do. You're living, and yet it's beginning to feed off of you. Now, this is a person who does not want to give just compensation. The other guy has worked, and you said, yeah, that sure looks good. And you take a big bite of his flesh and rip it from him. So he's left there wounded and bleeding and can't do anything until you take the next bite and the next bite until you consume him whole. That's the next part of the verse. And whole as those that go down into the pit. Not a one of us hadn't seen Jaws 5 to 10 times over, the movie. What did Jaws do? Jaws came up from beneath, and it swallowed whole its victims. Just swallowed them right down. Now, these are pictures of people who want to make a killing off of other people. They want to consume it upon their lust, bite for bite, just like death, and not give back anything in return. We shall all find precious substance. We'll fill our houses with spoil, theirs. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, this is wisdom. Walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil. These are not God's values of how to buy and sell and view money. These are not God's. This is getting the best of life apart from God. How to get more for less, something for nothing, without having to consider God in the overall picture. If God were here, they wouldn't be doing these things. But because God is not here, they don't consider Him and the way He would have them do it. They make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. In other words, if you see the trap, you're really dumb if you get caught in it. They lay wait for their own blood. Point, eventually, the hyenas and the sharks are going to become weak and sickly. Eventually, they're going to be aged or put in a disadvantaged situation. And what's going to happen to them? The other hyenas and the other sharks are going to begin to eat them. That's the way it goes. That's their nature. They lurk privately for their own lives. When they do it to others, they're just simply doing it to themselves. Eventually, what goes around comes around. Verse 19, and that's it. So are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, which takes away the life of the owners thereof. I don't like the picture of being a shark, having killer instinct, having a hurtful attitude toward other people, being a bottom feeder, and building one's nest egg on the work of another through finagling, stealing, or any other type of unjust gain.